Hi, Math 1, Mr. Bruns here. Today we're going to talk about solving absolute value equations. I want to give us a quick reminder of what absolute values do. If I take the absolute value of, say, -7, one way to think about it is absolute values, these bars here, take the thing that's inside, and if it was negative, makes it positive. If it was already positive, keeps it positive. So the absolute value of -7 is just 7. If I had taken the absolute value of 8, the absolute value of 8 is 8. Okay, it was already positive, so we just keep it positive. One interpretation of that is we think about the absolute values as giving us the distance from 0 on a number line. So here is 1, 2, 3. Here's the number 3, and so the absolute value of 3, it is 3 units away from 0. So that's 3. And then if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, here's the point -4. And the absolute value of -4 is going to be, well, it is 4 units away from 0. So that has a value of 4. So either way you want to think about it, absolute values takes whatever's inside the absolute value and makes it positive. Okay? So that's just dealing with the numbers themselves. What we want to talk about is, what if I don't know what's inside the absolute value? What if what I'm dealing with is x? And all I know is that the absolute value of x happens to be equal to 5. Okay? Well, there are two options, two things that would make that a true statement. One of those things is if x is equal to 5, because the absolute value of 5, sure enough, is equal to 5. And then the other thing, which I'm guessing probably some of you have guessed already, is that what if x is -5? So if I have the absolute value of -5, again, the absolute values remove the negative sign and think about it just as the positive value, or there's -5 is 5 units away from 0. So either x equal 5 or x equal -5 will make this a true equation here. So in solving this, typically what we want to do is we want to think about, okay, the thing that was inside of the absolute value, that thing had two options. That x value was either going to be equal to 5, or it was going to be equal to -5. So those are the two options. The thing inside the absolute value is either 5 or -5. All right, so let's look at a couple of slightly bigger examples here. How about the absolute value of x minus 3 is going to be equal to 8. Okay, so a little more complicated because you have that x minus 3 in here. What some students are tempted to do is they see a negative in there and they go, oh, absolute values make everything positive, and they turn it into an x plus 3. That's bad, that's wrong, that's not how these things are going to work for them. Okay, remember, two things, we have two options for what's happening to the thing inside the absolute value. Either that thing is going to be equal to 8, or that thing inside the absolute value will be equal to -8. And we're going to look at both possibilities. Okay, so one option is, let's make the x minus 3 equal to 8. And if I solve that simple equation, I add 3 to both sides, I see that, oh, that means x could be 11. Or we look at the -8 option and we say, what if x minus 3 is equal to -8? And then by adding 3 to both sides, we find that adding 3, -8 plus 3 gives me a -5. There's my second option. So there are two answers. Oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes you will find that we have two solutions to these absolute value equations. Okay, let's just double check real quick. If I were taking this x equals 11, if I plugged that back into my original absolute value, I would get absolute value of 11 minus 3. Does that equal 8? Question mark. Let's see, 11 minus 3, that's 8. Absolute value of 8. Is that equal to 8? Sure enough, that is true. Okay, what if I had tried x equal -5? If I put a -5 minus 3 inside the absolute value, asking, is that the same as 8? -5 minus 3 is a -8. And is the absolute value of -8 the same as 8? Absolutely, yes it is. So both those answers work. Okay, let's do one more example like this. How about the absolute value of 3x plus 7 is equal to 13? So again, the thing inside the absolute values, the 3x plus 7, that has two options. What's inside there is either equal to 13, or the thing inside there is equal to negative 13. Okay, so I'm going to look at the entire 3x plus 7 as one chunk. And so we'll solve those two possibilities, those two situations. 3x plus 7 is equal to 13, or we're going to solve 3x plus 7 equals negative 13. We'll actually solve both of those. So I'm going to subtract 7 on this one, subtract 7 from both sides. That gives me a 3x equals 6. I will divide by 3, and x is equal to 2. That's one of my options, one of my solutions. Same idea over here. I'm going to subtract 7. So I get negative 13 minus 7 is going to be a negative 20, and a negative minus a positive, or a negative plus a negative. And then we're going to divide by 3, and I get x is equal to negative 23rds. And if you want to leave it as a fraction like that, you can. If you want to turn it into a decimal, I think that's going to be negative 6.66666 repeating. But there are my two solutions. And again, if I were to check those, plug those back into that original absolute value equation, I would get absolute value of 13 equals 13, and absolute value of negative 13 equals 13. So the big step to keep in mind is this idea that you look at what's in there, and you make one equation where it's equal to positive 13, one equation where it's equal to negative 13.